You are about to fall asleep. That moment when your body shuts down but your mind keeps whispering. Most people waste it. They scroll, they worry, they replay the same stupid thoughts that made their life heavy in the first place. Buddhism doesn't treat sleep as escape. It treats it as an open gate. When the conscious mind loosens its grip, the deeper patterns become writable. This is where habits soften, identities weaken, and suffering can be interrupted. Not by force, not by hype, by understanding. If you listen properly, tonight doesn't just end your day, it quietly edits who you wake up as. 1. Your mind is not you. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, a voice narrates your life. It comments, judges, predicts, criticizes, compares. Over time, you stop noticing the voice and start assuming it is you. Buddhism calls this the fundamental mistake. Not sin, not ignorance of facts. Misidentification. You confuse a process with an identity. Look closely at how thoughts actually behave. They appear without asking permission. A memory shows up out of nowhere. A worry hijacks your attention. An image flashes and disappears. You did not choose the timing. You did not design the content. If thoughts were truly you, you would have control over them. You don't. That alone should raise suspicion about the story you've been told your whole life. The mind feels personal because thoughts use the word I. I failed. I need to fix this. I'm not enough. Language makes it feel intimate, but intimacy is not ownership. A radio can say your name. That doesn't make it you. Buddhism insists on this distinction because suffering depends on it. The moment you believe every thought is a statement about who you are trapped. Before sleep, this trap becomes obvious. You lie down, the lights go off, and suddenly the mind speeds up. Old conversations replay, imaginary futures unfold, regrets stack on top of each other. If the voice were truly you, why would it resist rest? Why would it sabotage the very recovery you need? The answer is simple and uncomfortable. It isn't working in your interest. It's just doing what it has been conditioned to do. Buddhism doesn't ask you to silence the mind. That's a beginner's fantasy, and it fails every time. The instruction is more precise. Notice the difference between the thought and the awareness of the thought. When a sentence appears in your head, something is already there to hear it. That something doesn't panic when a thought arrives. It doesn't argue. It doesn't comment. It simply knows that a thought is present. This is not philosophy. It's an observable fact. If you couldn't observe a thought, you wouldn't know it was there. Observation comes first, thought comes second. Yet most people reverse this and live as if thoughts are the source of awareness, instead of something appearing within it. When you start to notice this before sleep, a shift happens. A thought says, "Tomorrow will be a disaster." Instead of following it, you see it as a mental event. A sentence passing through consciousness. The content may still be unpleasant, but its authority weakens. It no longer feels like a prophecy. It feels like noise. This is why Buddhism says you don't need to fight thoughts. Fighting assumes the thought has power. Resistance feeds the loop. The mind interprets resistance as importance. What you allow to be seen without reaction loses energy. What you argue with multiplies. This is especially clear at night. The more you try to force sleep, the more alert the mind becomes. The more you try to shut the voice up, the louder it gets. Instead, treat thoughts like sounds in the distance. You don't chase a passing car to make it quiet. You don't wrestle the wind, you let it pass. The same applies here. When a thought arises, note it without adding commentary. No agreement, no rejection, just recognition. Something subtle but powerful happens with repetition. The brain learns that thoughts are not emergencies. Anxiety drops because anxiety is fueled by beliefs, not by thought itself. Ego softens because ego is nothing more than a collection of defended thoughts. Self-hatred weakens because it depends on taking internal criticism literally. The listener, the awareness that notices all of this, does not fluctuate the way thoughts do. Thoughts are frantic, repetitive, inconsistent. Awareness is steady. It doesn't rush. It doesn't narrate. It doesn't need reassurance. Buddhism points you to this not as a mystical idea, but as a practical anchor. When you rest as the listener, sleep comes naturally because there is nothing left to manage. Over time, this practice changes how you relate to your mind during the day as well. You start catching thoughts earlier. You see reactions forming before they turn into words or actions. You gain a small gap between impulse and response. That gap is freedom. Not freedom from thoughts, but freedom from obedience to them. This is what rewiring actually looks like. Not installing new beliefs, but withdrawing blind trust from old ones. Each night you practice seeing thoughts as objects. The nervous system updates. It learns that the presence of thought does not require action. It learns that silence is safe. It learns that awareness does not disappear when control relaxes. Eventually, something clicks. The mind still talks, but you stop living inside the commentary. You stop letting every sentence define you. Sleep deepens because there is no longer a manager on duty trying to fix life at midnight. You wake up clearer, not because problems vanished, but because you are no longer fused with the voice describing them. This is the foundation Buddhism lays before anything else. Not compassion, not discipline, not enlightenment. First, see the truth. The voice in your head is an event, not an identity. Once that is understood, suffering loses its grip, and sleep stops being a battlefield. 2. Craving is the engine of restlessness. Most people think their mind won't let them sleep because something is wrong with their life. Buddhism says that's not the real problem. The real problem is wanting life to be different than it is, especially when nothing can be changed. That wanting is called craving, and it is far more subtle and destructive than people realize. Craving doesn't always look like desire for pleasure. At night, it often disguises itself as worry, planning, or self-criticism. You lie in bed, and the mind starts negotiating with reality. If only I had said this. Tomorrow has to go better. I need to fix this before it's too late. These thoughts feel responsible, even necessary, but beneath them is a demand. Reality must comply with your expectations in order for you to feel okay. Buddhism is brutally honest here. That demand is the source of restlessness, not events, not memories, not uncertainty, the craving underneath them. The mind is not restless because it thinks. It's restless because it wants relief from thinking and believes thinking will provide it. This is the loop that keeps people awake. Notice how craving behaves before sleep. The body is tired, but the mind keeps reaching forward. It wants reassurance about the future or closure about the past. It wants certainty, control, justice, validation, and when it doesn't get those things, it tightens. That tightening is felt physically as tension, shallow breathing, and an inability to settle. Craving is exhausting because it never delivers what it promises. The mind says, just one more thought, and I'll be at peace. But peace never comes through satisfying craving. It only comes when craving stops. Buddhism does not moralize this. It treats craving like a mechanical process. When fuel is added, the engine runs. When fuel is removed, it stops. The problem is that most people don't recognize craving when it's happening. They think they're solving problems. But ask yourself this honestly. How many problems have you ever solved at midnight in bed? Almost none. Yet the mind keeps trying. Not because it's effective, but because craving convinces you that relief is just one thought away. Before sleep, Buddhism invites you to look directly at what the mind is asking for. Strip the thought down to its core. Is it asking for certainty, approval, safety, vindication, control? Once you see the demand clearly, something important becomes obvious. No amount of thinking will satisfy it. The demand itself is the problem. This is where many people misunderstand Buddhism. They think letting go means suppressing desire or becoming passive. That's wrong. Letting go means seeing that craving is unnecessary. It means recognizing that peace does not come from getting what you want, but from no longer insisting that you must have it right now. When this insight hits, even briefly, the body responds immediately. Muscles soften, breathing deepens, the nervous system exits fight mode. Sleep becomes possible not because your life is resolved, but because the struggle with it has paused. Craving also explains why distractions feel tempting at night. Scrolling, videos, noise, these aren't relaxing, they're anesthetics. They temporarily cover the discomfort of wanting things to be different, but when the stimulation stops, craving returns stronger. Buddhism doesn't tell you to distract yourself less out of discipline. It shows you why distraction fails. Instead of feeding craving, observe it, feel the urge to think, plan, or replay. Don't follow it, but don't suppress it either. Let the urge be felt fully in the body. Tight chest, restless energy, subtle anxiety. When craving is allowed to be felt without action, it burns itself out. This is uncomfortable at first, because you've trained yourself to escape it. But it works because craving cannot survive without movement. Night after night, this practice rewires the mind in a profound way. The brain learns that discomfort does not require immediate resolution. It learns that not getting what you want is survivable. Eventually, the mind stops panicking at the presence of uncertainty. Restlessness decreases because craving loses credibility. This doesn't mean you stop wanting things in life. It means you stop demanding satisfaction in moments where it is impossible. Sleep is one of those moments. You cannot think your way into rest. You cannot force peace. You can only stop chasing. Buddhism teaches that craving is endless because it is based on a misunderstanding. The belief that external conditions must align perfectly for you to be okay. Before sleep, this belief collapses on its own if you let it. You are lying still. Nothing is being fixed. Yet, awareness remains. This proves something quietly but powerfully. You don't need resolution to exist. You don't need certainty to rest. As this understanding deepens, sleep becomes deeper and more consistent. But more importantly, waking life changes. You become less reactive, less desperate, less controlled by the need for outcomes. You still act, but without the internal tension that comes from insisting life obey you. Craving is the engine of restlessness, but it is also the doorway to freedom. When you stop feeding it before sleep, the mind relearns how to be still. Not because it's forced, but because there is nothing left it needs to chase. 3. Impermanence is not a concept, it's a tool. Most people hear the idea that everything is temporary and treat it like background wisdom. Something nice to quote when things go wrong. Buddhism treats impermanence very differently. It's not a comforting slogan, it's a psychological instrument. Used correctly, it dismantles fear, attachment, and mental suffering at the root. The reason thoughts disturb you so much is not because they are painful, it's because you believe they will last. The mind assumes permanence by default. A bad mood feels like a condition. Anxiety feels like a state you're stuck in. A mistake feels like a permanent stain on who you are. This assumption quietly drives panic and resistance. Before sleep, this assumption becomes obvious. a memory appears, and the body reacts as if it's happening again. A worry surfaces, and the nervous system treats it like a real threat. Why? Because the mind believes the experience will continue unless you intervene. Impermanence cuts directly through that belief. Buddhism asks you to observe something simple but radical. Nothing you experience stays the same, even for a few seconds. Not thoughts, not emotions, not sensations, not awareness of them. Everything is in motion, whether you like it or not. You don't have to make change happen. It's already happening. Lie in bed and watch closely. A thought appears. If you don't touch it, it shifts, it weakens, it morphs into something else, or it vanishes entirely. The same with emotions. Fear spikes, then dulls. Sadness pulses, then fades. Even physical discomfort fluctuates. This isn't theory, it's observable reality. Most people never notice this because they interfere immediately. They argue with thoughts, judge emotions, or distract themselves. Interference freezes the process. Observation lets impermanence do its work. This is why impermanence is a tool, not an idea. When you truly see that an experience is changing on its own, you stop trying to escape it. And the moment you stop escaping, suffering drops sharply. Pain may still be present, but the panic around it dissolves. Before sleep, this matters more than at any other time. The mind is quieter. Sensations are clearer. You can actually see change happening in real time. A worry arises, peaks, and dissolves. A memory loses emotional charge as it repeats. The nervous system learns something crucial. Nothing needs to be fixed for relief to occur. This learning rewires fear at a deep level. Fear exists to protect you from what seems permanent and threatening. When the brain realizes that internal experiences are self-resolving, it stops triggering emergency responses. Sleep becomes easier because the system no longer feels trapped. Impermanence also breaks the illusion of identity. You think you are anxious, you think you are broken, you think you are behind in life. But these are descriptions of temporary mental states, not facts about a solid self. Watch carefully, and you'll see how quickly these states change. If they were truly you, they wouldn't come and go. Buddhism emphasizes this because identity-based suffering is the heaviest kind. When pain is seen as permanent and personal, it becomes unbearable. When it's seen as transient and impersonal, it becomes workable. Impermanence removes the "this is who I am" story that keeps people stuck. There is a reason the mind resists this insight at first. If things are impermanent, then control is limited. The ego wants stability, it wants guarantees, it wants certainty. Impermanence threatens that illusion. But once accepted, it brings a deeper kind of safety, the safety of knowing that no state can imprison you forever. Before sleep, you don't need to repeat "this will pass" like a mantra. That turns impermanence into hope, which is still attachment. Instead, observe passing directly, feel the breath change. Notice the gaps between thoughts, sense how sensations flicker rather than hold steady. This observation creates patience without effort. You stop rushing experiences toward resolution. You stop demanding relief on your timeline. You let time do what it already does best: end things. Overnight, something profound happens. The mind stops catastrophizing temporary states. A bad day no longer defines your life. A restless night doesn't become a personal failure. You develop trust in change itself, not optimism. Trust. This trust changes how you fall asleep. You no longer panic when thoughts appear. You know they will fade. You no longer tense up when emotions arise. You've seen them dissolve too many times to believe they're threats. Impermanence also softens attachment to pleasure. When the mind stops clinging to pleasant states, it stops fearing their loss. This balance reduces emotional swings and stabilizes mood. Sleep deepens because there's less internal grabbing and resisting. Buddhism doesn't teach impermanence to make you detached from life. It teaches it to free you from unnecessary suffering. When you stop treating passing experiences as permanent truths, the mind relaxes into reality as it is. Before sleep, impermanence is always available. You don't have to create calm. You only have to watch change. In doing so, you let the body remember something it already knows. Nothing lasts, including discomfort. And when that truth sinks in, rest becomes natural. Fear. You are exhausted because you resist reality. Most people think exhaustion comes from doing too much. Buddhism points to something far more draining, arguing with what has already happened. This argument runs constantly in the background of the mind, especially at night. It sounds like analysis, reflection, or self-improvement, but it's none of those. It's resistance. Resistance is the refusal to let reality be what it is. It shows up as replaying conversations, correcting the past, rehearsing different versions of yourself, or imagining how things should have gone. None of this changes anything, yet it consumes enormous mental energy. That energy loss is what you feel as deep fatigue that sleep alone doesn't fix. Before sleep, resistance becomes impossible to hide. The body is still, there are no distractions, and the mind turns inward. That's when unfinished business screams for attention. The mind tries to rewrite the day. It wants closure, fairness, justification, or control. But the day is already over. Reality has already moved on. Buddhism is direct about this. Pain is unavoidable. Resistance is optional. The exhaustion you feel is not caused by the event itself, but by your refusal to accept that the event is now part of the past. This is not moral judgment, it's mechanics. Fighting what exists creates friction. Friction generates heat. Heat burns energy. Notice how resistance feels in the body: tight jaw, tense shoulders, shallow breath. A constant readiness to act, even though there is nothing to do. This state prevents real rest. Sleep requires surrender. Resistance keeps the nervous system in alert mode. Many people confuse acceptance with approval. They think accepting reality means agreeing with it or liking it. That's wrong. Acceptance simply means you stop denying what already exists. You can acknowledge that something was unfair, painful, or damaging without continuing to fight it internally. The fight is what drains you, not the memory. Before sleep, try something simple and uncomfortable. Instead of replaying the day, state the facts without commentary. This happened. That was said. This feeling arose. No blame. No justification. Just acknowledgement. You may feel a wave of discomfort at first. That's the withdrawal from resistance. When resistance drops, even briefly, the body responds immediately. Muscles soften, the breath slows, the mind becomes less sharp-edged. This is not relaxation techniques working. This is the nervous system recognizing that the battle is over. Resistance also feeds identity. The story of who you are depends on what you argue against. Victim, hero, failure, missed potential. When you stop resisting, these identities lose fuel. That can feel threatening at first. Many people would rather stay exhausted than lose a familiar story about themselves. Buddhism cuts through this attachment. It shows you that identity maintenance is costly. You spend energy every day protecting an image of yourself and your life. At night, when that effort falters, anxiety spikes. The mind scrambles to hold the narrative together. Letting go feels like losing control, but what you're really losing is unnecessary labor. The moment you stop trying to fix the past in your head, something surprising happens. The past loses its emotional charge, not because it's resolved, but because you're no longer feeding it. Memories without resistance are just images. They don't have teeth. This practice doesn't make you passive in life. During the day, action still matters. Reflection still has its place. But nighttime is not the place for resistance. There is nothing productive to do there. Buddhism recognizes this and teaches you to align effort with reality instead of fighting it. Over time, this lesson changes how tired you feel even after a full night's sleep. You wake up with more energy because you stopped burning it internally. You become clearer because your mind is no longer cluttered with unfinished arguments. Sleep deepens not because you force it, but because nothing is blocking it anymore. When resistance drops, rest is the natural default state of the body. Buddhism's insight here is simple and uncomfortable. You are not tired because life is hard. You are tired because you refuse to let life be what it already is. Before sleep, reality cannot be negotiated. The only choice is whether you continue to fight it, or finally put the weight down. When you stop resisting, even for a moment, the body understands something profound. It doesn't need to stay alert. The danger is over. And in that recognition, sleep arrives on its own. 5. The self you defend all day is a construction. All day long, you are maintaining something, an image, a position, a story about who you are. You may not consciously think about it, but enormous mental energy goes into protecting this structure. How you are seen, how you see yourself, whether you are right, capable, moral, strong, wronged, ahead, or behind. Buddhism doesn't treat this as a personality trait. It treats it as a process, and a very costly one. The self you think you are is not a solid thing. It's assembled moment by moment, out of thoughts, memories, comparisons, and reactions. But because this assembly happens constantly, it feels permanent. Like a building that's always been there, Buddhism points out something unsettling. If you stop feeding the structure, it weakens. And if you stop long enough, it dissolves. During the day, the self feels necessary. You need it to function, to make decisions, to navigate social life. But at night, when there is nothing to perform and no one to convince, the self becomes a burden. This is why many people struggle to sleep. The machinery that maintains identity doesn't know how to turn itself off. Before sleep, notice what the mind is defending: a reputation, a past choice, a future version of yourself, the need to be right in an argument that's already over, the need to justify why you are where you are in life. These defenses feel automatic, but they are learned habits, and they keep the nervous system active long after the body is ready to rest. Buddhism is clear: the self is not the problem, clinging to it is. The effort required to hold the story together creates tension. The fear of losing the story creates anxiety. Sleep becomes difficult because letting go feels like disappearing. This fear is subtle. It shows up as the thought, if I stop thinking, I lose control. Or, if I stop reviewing my life, something will go wrong. These thoughts are not about safety. They are about identity survival. The mind is protecting a narrative, not your actual well-being. Before sleep, Buddhism invites you to drop the role, not permanently, just for now. You don't need to be successful, improving, or understood in this moment. You don't need to be a good or bad person. You don't need to have an answer to your life. All of that can resume tomorrow. This is harder than it sounds because the self is addicted to continuity. It wants to exist across time. But sleep interrupts continuity. Conscious control fades. And the self panics because it depends on constant reinforcement. Watch what happens when you stop feeding the story. When a thought arises about who you are, don't continue it. Let it end. There may be a moment of emptiness or disorientation. That's normal. It's the space that was previously occupied by self-talk. In that space, something surprising is revealed. Awareness remains, breathing continues, the body functions. You are still here, even without a story about yourself. This directly contradicts the mind's fear that identity is required for existence. This recognition is deeply relieving. The nervous system relaxes because it no longer has to protect an image. There is nothing to defend in the dark. No audience, no scoreboard, no comparison. Over time, this practice changes how seriously you take yourself during the day. You still act, plan, and care, but with less rigidity. Criticism stings less. Praise matters less. You recover faster from mistakes because the self you're defending is no longer brittle. Sleep improves because the mind learns that nothing bad happens when the story pauses. Letting go stops feeling dangerous. It starts feeling natural. Buddhism does not ask you to destroy the self. It asks you to see it for what it is, a useful but temporary construction. When it's not needed, you can set it down. Before sleep, the self is not needed. The moment you stop maintaining it, a massive amount of energy is freed. That energy returns to the body as rest. When you finally allow yourself to be no one for a while, you don't disappear, you rest. 6. Awareness continues, even when control stops. One of the deepest fears people carry is the fear of losing control. Not in dramatic situations, but in quiet ones, especially before sleep. The mind resists drifting off because drifting off feels like disappearance, like letting go of the wheel while the vehicle is still moving. Buddhism looks directly at this fear and exposes it as unnecessary. You've been trained to believe that constant control is what keeps you safe. Planning, monitoring, thinking, checking. The mind equates activity with protection. So when sleep approaches and control begins to loosen, the mind panics. It floods you with thoughts, memories, and concerns to stay in charge. Buddhism doesn't ask you to force surrender. It asks you to notice something that's already happening. As you lie in bed, control fades on its own. Thoughts become fragmented, attention drifts, the ability to hold a clear narrative weakens. And yet, something remains aware of all of this. That awareness does not depend on effort. You are not producing it. You are not sustaining it. It's simply present. Even as thoughts lose coherence, awareness continues to register fading, drifting, and silence. This directly contradicts the belief that control is required for existence. Notice how this plays out each night. You don't decide the exact moment sleep begins. It happens. You don't manage the transition. It unfolds. Control fails every night, and nothing catastrophic occurs. Yet the mind treats this as a threat instead of a natural process. The fear here is not of sleep itself. It's the fear that if you stop managing your mind, something will go wrong. Buddhism invites you to test this fear directly. Let control weaken without intervening. Let attention float. Let thoughts break apart. See what actually happens. What happens is not chaos, it's continuity without effort. Breathing continues. The body remains safe. Awareness doesn't blink out. The mind's role as a supervisor is revealed to be optional. This realization builds trust at a level deeper than belief. You don't have to convince yourself that it's safe to let go. You experience it. Night after night, the nervous system learns that release does not equal danger. This trust carries into waking life. You stop micromanaging your inner world. You allow emotions to rise without immediately trying to regulate them. You stop panicking when thoughts lose clarity under stress. You've seen what happens when control drops. Nothing breaks. Before sleep, this lesson is especially powerful. Instead of trying to fall asleep, allow the loss of control to happen. Notice the urge to reassert thinking. Then, let that urge pass. The mind learns that it doesn't need to be on duty all the time. Many people unknowingly resist sleep because they equate letting go with vulnerability. Buddhism reframes vulnerability as natural. Every night you release consciousness, every morning it returns. There is no evidence that control is the thing holding you together. As this understanding deepens, anxiety around sleep fades. You no longer feel the need to monitor the process. You stop checking whether you're falling asleep fast enough. The body takes over. Buddhism does not romanticize this. It treats it as a functional insight. When the system trusts that awareness persists without effort, it stops burning energy on unnecessary vigilance. Eventually, surrender stops feeling like loss. It feels like relief. You stop bracing against the dark. You stop clinging to thought as a life raft. Control was never the source of safety. Awareness was always there, quietly watching, even as control pretended to be in charge. When you let go at night, you don't disappear. You discover that you were never the one holding everything together in the first place. 7. What you feed before sleep shapes who you become. Most people underestimate the final moments of the day. They treat them as a collapse into unconsciousness, a passive shutdown. Buddhism understands those moments as a handover. The conscious, effortful mind loosens its grip, and whatever has been repeated, believed, and rehearsed sinks deeper. This is not mysticism, it's conditioning. Your mind does not reset when you sleep, it consolidates. Patterns strengthened before sleep are carried forward. Emotional tones, unresolved tensions, and habitual reactions don't vanish overnight. They are reinforced. This is why the last mental states of the day matter far more than people realize. Most nights, the mind feeds itself the same diet. Replays of conflict, self-judgment, fear about the future, regret about the past. The problem is not that these thoughts occur. The problem is that they are consumed passively, without awareness. Whatever you repeatedly engage with becomes familiar. Whatever becomes familiar becomes default. Buddhism approaches this without moral panic. It doesn't tell you to force positive thoughts or repeat affirmations. That would only add more craving and resistance. Instead, it teaches something far more effective. Incline the mind toward clarity and non-hostility. Before sleep, you are not trying to improve yourselves. You are setting conditions. There is a difference. Improvement implies struggle. Conditions imply alignment. You are simply deciding what mental states you stop feeding and which ones you allow to remain. The mind before sleep is impressionable because defenses are low. The analytical layer weakens. Emotional memory strengthens. This is why bedtime rumination has such a strong impact. But the same vulnerability can be used skillfully. Notice the tone of your mind as the day ends. Is it harsh, demanding, urgent? This tone doesn't stay in the mind. It imprints into the nervous system. You wake up with it. Over time, it becomes your baseline. Buddhism invites you to end the day without hostility toward your experience. That does not mean liking your life or approving of your choices. It means dropping the internal attack. Self-directed aggression before sleep is especially damaging because there is no counterbalance, no action, no correction, just repetition. Non-hostility is not indifference. It is the absence of violence toward your own mind. When a regret appears, you don't punish yourself for it. When fear arises, you don't shame yourself for feeling it. You allow these states to exist without escalation. This simple shift changes conditioning dramatically. The brain learns that mistakes are survivable, that fear does not require self-attack, that awareness can hold discomfort without adding cruelty. Over weeks, this reduces chronic anxiety and self-criticism at their root. Buddhism also emphasizes recollection before sleep, not of achievements but of understanding. remembering that thoughts are not commands, that craving is optional, that experiences pass, that identity is constructed. These reminders don't function as beliefs, they function as orientation. What you recall before sleep becomes the lens through which the mind organizes experience. If the lens is fear, the mind wakes up braced. If the lens is clarity, the mind wakes up steadier. Many people try to fix themselves during the day and then sabotage themselves at night. They spend hours cultivating discipline or insight, then feed the mind chaos before sleep. Buddhism sees this as wasted effort. Conditioning doesn't respond to intention alone. It responds to repetition. This is why monks guard the mind at night, not through force, but through restraint. They don't indulge mental drama when the mind is most absorbent. They don't rehearse identity stories. They don't feed resentment or fantasy. They allow simplicity to settle in. Over time, this creates a noticeable shift. You wake up less reactive, not because life improved overnight, but because the mind stopped marinating in agitation every evening. Emotional recovery becomes faster. Stress lingers less. This also explains why sleep can be deep even when life is difficult. When the mind is not poisoned before rest, the body can repair itself. When the final state of the day is clarity rather than conflict, the nervous system resets more completely. Buddhism does not promise transformation in one night. It promises direction. Night after night, the mind is shaped by what you allow to echo as consciousness fades. If you end the day feeding anxiety, you become more anxious. If you end the day feeding self-attack, you become harsher toward yourself. If you end the day feeding awareness, patience, and non-resistance, those qualities strengthen quietly. You don't need to add anything. You only need to stop feeding what harms you when you are least able to defend against it. The last moments before sleep are not empty, they are formative. What you place there is what grows. When you understand this, sleep stops being just rest. It becomes training. And over time, you wake up not as a new person, but as a less conditioned one. 8. Silence is not emptiness. It is where the mind resets. Most people are afraid of silence. Not external silence, but internal silence. The moment thoughts slow down, discomfort appears. The mind rushes to fill the gap with noise, memories, fantasies, or worries. Buddhism sees this reaction clearly and names it without drama. Addiction to mental stimulation. Silence feels threatening because it removes the usual reference points. No story, no problem to solve, no identity to reinforce. For a mind trained to exist through activity, silence feels like groundlessness. This is why many people unconsciously avoid falling asleep. Sleep requires passing through silence, and silence exposes what the mind normally hides behind noise. Buddhism does not treat silence as a mystical state to chase. It treats it as the natural condition beneath mental activity. Thoughts are additions. Silence is the base layer. When you stop interfering, silence doesn't need to be created. It reveals itself. Before sleep, this is especially clear. As the mind slows, gaps appear between thoughts. At first, they are brief, a second, a fraction of a second. Most people immediately fill these gaps with new thinking because the absence feels uncomfortable. Buddhism trains you to stay. When you remain in these gaps without reaching for thought, something important happens. The nervous system begins to reset. Silence is not neutral to the body. It signals safety. No threat detected. No action required. This is why true silence feels relieving once you stop resisting it. The discomfort people feel around silence is not caused by silence itself. It is caused by withdrawal from constant mental stimulation. The mind has been trained to self-soothe through thinking. When that stimulation is removed, unease surfaces. Buddhism understands this and does not pathologize it. It simply encourages patience. If you allow silence to remain without labeling it, judging it, or trying to deepen it, it stabilizes on its own. You begin to sense presence without narration, awareness without commentary. This is deeply unfamiliar to most people, which is why it feels strange at first. Silence also reveals how unnecessary much of your mental activity is. When thoughts pause, nothing collapses. You don't vanish. The body continues. Awareness remains. This directly undermines the belief that thinking is what keeps you alive or functional. Before sleep, silence is the doorway the mind must pass through. If you keep dragging thoughts with you, sleep stays shallow or delayed. When you allow silence to widen naturally, sleep deepens without effort. Buddhism points out something subtle here. Silence is not something you enter, it's something you stop leaving. Each thought pulls you away from it. When thoughts slow, you simply remain where you already are. This understanding changes how you relate to restlessness. Restlessness is not a signal that something is wrong. It is the mind struggling to stay entertained when stimulation is removed. When you see this clearly, restlessness loses its urgency. Over time, learning to rest in silence before sleep has effects far beyond the night. You become less dependent on distraction during the day. You tolerate boredom without panic. You stop compulsively filling every moment with input. This creates mental space. Space allows perspective. Perspective reduces reactivity. Silence, practiced gently and consistently, becomes one of the most powerful stabilizers of the mind. Buddhism does not encourage you to chase silent states or measure progress. That would turn silence into another object of craving. Instead, it asks you to stop interrupting the natural quiet that appears when effort relaxes. Before sleep, silence is already approaching. You don't need to help it, you only need to stop fighting it. Let the mind wind down without replacing it with another story. When silence is allowed, the mind resets at a deeper level than sleep alone can provide. It's not unconscious rest, it's conscious unwinding. Eventually, silence stops feeling empty. It feels full, steady, and grounding. You stop fearing it because you recognize it as home. When you can rest in silence, even briefly, sleep no longer feels like a loss of control. It feels like a return. 9. Suffering continues because you personalize experience. One of the most deeply ingrained habits of the mind is personalization. Whatever arises, the mind immediately frames it as happening to someone. To me, because of me, about me. This habit is so automatic that most people never question it. Buddhism does, because this single move multiplies suffering more than any external event ever could. Pain by itself is manageable. Sensation by itself is neutral. Even strong emotion can move through the system without leaving damage. What turns pain into suffering is the moment the mind says, "This shouldn't be happening to me," or "This means something about who I am." That interpretation locks the experience in place. Before sleep, personalization becomes especially active. A memory appears and instantly becomes my mistake. A fear arises and becomes my future. A feeling of heaviness becomes my problem. The experience itself is temporary, but the ownership makes it feel permanent and threatening. Buddhism dismantles this habit by asking you to observe something uncomfortable but liberating. Experiences happen, but they do not belong to anyone. Thoughts arise due to conditions. Emotions surge due to chemistry, memory, and stimulus. Sensations appear due to the body. None of this requires a personal owner. This does not mean experiences aren't felt. They are. It means the extra layer of identity is optional. The suffering you experience is not caused by the thought or emotion itself, but by the way you wrap it in a story of self. Notice how this works at night. A simple sensation of restlessness appears. Instead of being felt, it becomes, "Why am I like this?" A passing sadness becomes, "There's something wrong with me." The experience hasn't changed, but the interpretation has transformed it into a problem that demands resolution. Personalization triggers urgency. If something is happening to you, it must be fixed immediately. This urgency keeps the nervous system alert and blocks sleep. Buddhism teaches you to remove urgency by removing ownership. Try this before sleep. When a thought arises, don't ask what it means about you. Ask what conditions produced it. Fatigue, habit, memory, stress, biology. Once you see the causes, the personal charge weakens. The thought becomes an event, not a verdict. This shift is subtle but profound. Without personalization, emotions are allowed to complete their cycle. They rise, peak, and dissolve. With personalization, they get trapped in interpretation and repeat endlessly. Buddhism emphasizes this because the self thrives on ownership. The moment you say, "My suffering," the self has something to defend, analyze, and maintain. When ownership drops, the self loses relevance. And with that loss comes relief. Many people fear this teaching because they think it denies responsibility. It doesn't. Responsibility exists at the level of action, not identity. You can take responsibility for behavior without turning every internal experience into a personal flaw. Before sleep, responsibility is irrelevant. There is nothing to do. Personalization at night serves no purpose except to prolong suffering. Buddhism invites you to notice this and stop participating. When you allow experiences to arise without claiming them, a surprising calm appears. Not because everything feels good, but because nothing feels like an emergency. The body relaxes when it is no longer under attack from interpretation. Over time, this practice changes how you relate to difficulty during the day as well. You stop taking every mood as a message about your worth. You stop treating every thought as a reflection of reality. Life becomes lighter because less of it is carried personally. Sleep improves because the mind no longer feels responsible for managing every internal fluctuation. You stop lying awake trying to fix yourself. There is nothing to fix. Experiences are happening. That's all. Buddhism's insight here is simple and unsettling. Suffering continues not because life is cruel, but because you insist on making every experience about you. When that insistence drops, suffering loosens its grip. Before sleep, you have a rare opportunity to practice this directly. Let experiences happen without a name attached to them. No owner, no story, just movement. In that simplicity, the mind finds rest, not because it solved anything, but because it finally stopped taking everything personally. 10. Letting go is not an action. It is the absence of interference. Most people misunderstand letting go. They treat it as something to do, a technique, an effort. They try to release thoughts, relax the body, drop tension. This effort often backfires. The mind tightens, frustration builds, and sleep moves further away. Buddhism cuts through this confusion with a simple but uncomfortable truth. Letting go is not an action. It is what remains when you stop interfering. Interference is subtle. It shows up as adjusting your breath, monitoring your state, checking whether you're relaxed enough, judging how well the practice is going. None of this feels aggressive, but it is still control. And control, no matter how gentle, keeps the nervous system active. Before sleep, interference is constant. The mind tries to manage the transition into rest. Am I falling asleep yet? Why am I still awake? I need to calm down. These thoughts seem reasonable, but they keep attention engaged and prevent natural shutdown. Buddhism teaches you to notice this management impulse without acting on it. Let the breath breathe itself. Let the body settle in its own rhythm. Let attention drift without correcting it. This feels counterintuitive because you've been trained to believe that effort produces results. Sleep disproves that belief every night. You don't fall asleep by doing something. You fall asleep by stopping. Stopping control. Stopping evaluation. Stopping the need to guide the process. Letting go is what happens when you stop fixing the moment. When the mind is no longer correcting, awareness rests without friction. The system shifts from doing to being without instruction. This is why sleep often arrives when you give up on trying to sleep. The moment effort drops, the body takes over. Buddhism recognizes this and teaches you to trust it instead of fighting it. Letting go also applies to emotional content. You don't need to release emotions. You only need to stop holding them in place through interpretation. When you stop explaining, justifying, or resisting an emotion, it completes itself naturally. Many people think they are bad at letting go because thoughts keep appearing. That's a misunderstanding. Letting go does not mean the absence of thought. It means the absence of interference with thought. Thoughts can come and go freely without hooking attention. Before sleep, allow the mind to wander without commentary. Don't follow, don't suppress, don't correct. This neutrality creates the conditions for rest. Over time, this insight changes how you approach difficulty in life. You stop forcing clarity. You stop demanding resolution. You learn to wait without tension. This patience is not passive. It is grounded. Buddhism's final lesson before rest is quiet and unspectacular. There is nothing to achieve, nothing to perfect, nothing to release. When interference stops, letting go happens on its own. And in that absence of effort, the mind finally rests. 11. You don't need to fix yourself to be at peace. One of the deepest assumptions driving your mental exhaustion is the belief that something about you is fundamentally wrong and needs fixing. This belief hides beneath self-improvement, reflection, discipline, and even spirituality. Buddhism exposes this assumption not to make you complacent, but to remove a burden you were never meant to carry. Notice how the mind behaves before sleep. It reviews the day and immediately starts diagnosing what you did wrong, what you should have done better, what kind of person you are because of it. This feels responsible, even virtuous, but it's actually a form of self-surveillance, and surveillance never produces peace. The belief that you must fix yourself to deserve rest is one of the most damaging ideas you've absorbed. It keeps the mind working long after it should shut down. It turns sleep into a reward instead of a biological necessity. Buddhism is direct here. Peace is not something you earn by correcting yourself. Peace is what remains when you stop attacking yourself. This doesn't mean you never grow or change. It means growth does not require self-rejection. The constant internal message, "I'm not enough yet," creates chronic tension. The nervous system stays alert because it believes improvement is required for safety. Before sleep, this belief becomes toxic. There is nothing you can fix at that hour. No insight will redeem the day. No mental effort will rewrite who you are. Yet the mind keeps trying, because it has confused worth with performance. Buddhism dismantles this by pointing to a simple reality. Awareness does not need improvement to exist. You are conscious whether your thoughts are wise or foolish. You breathe whether your life makes sense or not. Existence is already happening without your approval. When you see this clearly, self-fixing loses urgency. You stop treating every flaw as a threat. You stop using rest as a bargaining chip. The body relaxes when it is no longer under constant evaluation. This is uncomfortable at first, The mind feels naked without its improvement agenda. There can be a sense of guilt for not trying harder, but that guilt is conditioned. It is not truth. Before sleep, allow yourself to be unfinished, not temporarily, but fundamentally. Every human being is unfinished. Trying to resolve that fact mentally only creates suffering. Accepting it creates rest. This acceptance does not weaken you, it stabilizes you. When you are no longer at war with yourself, change becomes possible without desperation. But at night, change is irrelevant. What matters is allowing the system to stand down. Watch what happens when you stop scanning for what's wrong with you. Thoughts still appear, but they lose their sharpness. Emotions arise, but they don't feel accusatory. There is space to rest without justification. Buddhism's insight here is quiet but radical. You are allowed to rest even if you are imperfect. Even if you failed. Even if your life is unresolved. Peace is not the result of fixing yourself. Peace is what appears when the fixing stops. Before sleep, you don't need to improve. You only need to stop demanding that you be someone else. When that demand drops, the mind finally lets go. And sleep comes, not as a reward, but as a return to what was always allowed. 12. Nothing needs to be held onto in the dark. There is a moment every night when holding on becomes unnecessary. Most people miss it because they are too busy gripping their thoughts, their identity, their problems, and their expectations. Buddhism points directly to this moment and says something radical. When the lights go out, nothing needs to be carried forward. During the day, holding on feels functional. You hold on to plans to stay organized. You hold on to memories to protect yourself. You hold on to identity to navigate the world. But at night, all of this becomes dead weight. There is nothing to accomplish, no one to perform for, no future to manage. Yet the mind keeps clenching as if letting go would be dangerous. This habit of holding on is deeply conditioned. You've been trained to believe that vigilance equals responsibility. That if you loosen your grip, something will slip, something will be lost, something will go wrong. Buddhism challenges this belief not with reassurance, but with observation. Look closely before sleep. What exactly are you holding on to? A conversation that already ended? A mistake that cannot be undone? A version of tomorrow that exists only in thought? None of these require your attention in the dark. They persist only because you keep supplying energy to them. Holding on feels active, but it is actually fear in disguise. Fear of losing control. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear of facing emptiness. Buddhism does not ask you to confront these fears directly. It asks you to stop feeding them. When you stop holding on to a thought, it doesn't need to be pushed away. It simply dissolves. The mind resists this at first because holding feels familiar. Letting go feels like stepping into nothing. But that nothing is not a void. It is unburdened awareness. This is why people often feel a subtle panic right before falling asleep. It's not because something bad is happening. It's because the mind is losing its objects. No thoughts to grip, no identity to rehearse, no narrative to maintain. The ego experiences this as loss, but the body experiences it as relief. Buddhism teaches you to trust the body over the ego in this moment. The body knows how to rest. It doesn't need a story to function. It doesn't need reassurance about tomorrow. It only needs permission to stop bracing. Letting go at night is not dramatic. It's quiet and almost boring. You stop following thoughts. You stop checking your state. You stop carrying the day with you. There is no grand release, only the absence of effort. Many people wait for a feeling of peace before they let go. Buddhism reverses this order. Peace is not the condition for letting go. Letting go is the condition for peace. This insight changes how you relate to sleep entirely. Sleep is no longer something you chase or manage. It becomes something that happens when you stop interfering. You don't need to reach for it. You only need to stop holding on to what blocks it. Over time, this lesson extends beyond the night. You begin to notice how much of your suffering comes from unnecessary clinging to outcomes, to roles, to opinions about yourself. The night teaches you, gently but relentlessly, that none of these are required for existence. Every time you fall asleep, you practice dying to the day. And every time you wake up, you are reborn without having held on to anything. Buddhism uses this daily cycle as proof. Letting go is safe. Before sleep, remind yourself of this truth. There is nothing you need to protect in the dark, nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to be. When you finally stop holding on, the mind does not collapse, it rests. And in that rest, you discover something simple and liberating. You were never meant to carry everything into the night. You've now seen the pattern Buddhism keeps pointing to, again and again, from different angles. The mind suffers not because life is too heavy, but because it insists on carrying what was never meant to be carried into the night. Thoughts are mistaken for identity. Craving pretends to be problem-solving. Resistance drains energy. The self demands constant maintenance. Control refuses to loosen. Experiences are taken personally. Letting go is misunderstood as effort. Improvement turns into self-attack. Silence is avoided, and holding on becomes habit. None of this is a moral failure. It's conditioning. What makes night so powerful is that conditioning weakens on its own. The mind is already letting go, whether you help it or not. Buddhism doesn't add anything to this process. It removes interference. It teaches you to stop feeding the patterns that keep you awake and to trust the intelligence of rest itself. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. Sleep is not something you achieve. It is something that happens when the struggle ends. You don't need the perfect mindset. You don't need the right emotion. You don't need to resolve your life before closing your eyes. You only need to stop demanding that the mind be different from what it is. Night after night, when you allow thoughts to pass without obedience, craving to dissolve without satisfaction, identity to loosen without fear, and silence to exist without filling it, something fundamental shifts, not dramatically, quietly. The mind relearns how to stand down. And when the mind stands down, the body remembers how to rest. This is why Buddhism treats sleep as practice, not escape. Each night is a rehearsal in letting go. Each morning is proof that letting go did not destroy you. Over time, that proof accumulates. Trust replaces vigilance. Clarity replaces tension. Suffering loosens its grip. You don't wake up as a different person. You wake up less burdened. And that is enough.